Apalachicola River, about a little over 100 miles from Chattahoochee to Apalachicola, Florida, over the course of 5 days. I just completed my 4th river trek. So paddling and being a part of being on the river and experiencing the river is a very important part of my life and my personal interests. And then this is also participating in Riverkeeper and being able to speak about it is also a way to exercise my interest in advocacy and in getting people to think about not just environmental impact, but human impact and how history and culture and environment converge in interesting ways. So Jessie's going to keep me on time as best she can, but I know that I'm standing between us and lunch, so I'll do my best as well. So for those who don't know, the Apalachicola Riverkeeper is a nonprofit organization. Their offices are based in Apalachicola, Florida. If you haven't been to Apalachicola, you should go. You could go across the bridge and hang out at the beach on St. George Island, but also spend some time in the town of Apalachicola. Historically, Apalachicola was one of Florida's most important commerce zones. It was a major site in the early 19th century through the Civil War of cotton distribution. It was a major port for this region in Florida. And today is just a really cool tourist town. Our work in the Apalachicola Riverkeeper, our job, there is a Riverkeeper. Dan Tonsmeyer is our current Riverkeeper. He spends many, many hours on the river working tirelessly to introduce people to the issues along the river, to advocate for the river. We are the voice of the Apalachicola River and the basin. This has brought us to writs for the Supreme Court case that I'll talk about in a little bit, advocacy against fracking in the state of Florida, and particularly in the Panhandle, and trying to go into communities all up and down the river corridor and really listen to what are the things affecting the people in the corridor and what's the plan in communities in relationship to the river. We also do quite a bit of outreach, education, coalition, and partner building. We're part of the AFC, the Apalachicola Flint Chattahoochee coalition that looks at the entire basin. And I'll talk a little bit later about a great project we did with faculty here at FSU. So what am I talking about? So the Apalachicola River on this slide is the darker green, the basin is the darker green area at the bottom, and I'll have a more detailed image of that. But the entire system is really known as the Apalachicola Flint Chattahoochee system because the Apalachicola River forms when the Flint River and the Chattahoochee River converge at Lake Seminole and form the Apalachicola below the Woodruff Dam in Chattahoochee. This 20,000 acre floodplain that exists across 3 states, beginning north of Atlanta, passing through Atlanta. It's actually it starts as a trickle out of the side of a mountain just north of Atlanta in the North Georgia mountains that comes through western Georgia, southeastern Alabama, passes through hundreds of thousands, if not millions of acres of farmland, passes through major population zones, Atlanta being one of those. Everything in the basin above Lake Seminole and the Woodruff Dam absolutely and intimately affects everything that happens below the Woodruff Dam. The Supreme Court case that will go to final oral arguments in the spring, which is the culmination of decades, we'll say, yes, decades of legal action and arguments between the states of Florida, Alabama, and Georgia, is really about this question, and it's about the entire system. And how is it that the Army Corps of Engineers controls flow from the upper basin into the lower basin, the choices that are made between interstates or within the states and between the states about where the water gets parsed, what controls there are over the water, is of fundamental importance to everything that happens below. The river itself, the Apalachicola River itself, is about 107 miles. You'll see 106 in some places. That starts at the bottom of the dam. It covers I think 30,000, almost 30,000 acres of floodplain in Florida itself. I'm looking at Elizabeth back there because I just kept the number wrong. Travels multiple terrains for 106 miles. One of the things that I find personally most interesting about paddling the entire length of the river is that you move through at least 3 geological zones, as well as a basin. It's one of 6 biodiversity hotspots in the United States and in the world. It's one of the largest rivers in the state of Florida, and it's mostly undeveloped, which is a pretty unique thing in the United States. I'm not going to read you everything that's on all of these slides, don't worry. One of the reasons, or many of the reasons, that the Apalachicola and its basin are so unique, as I mentioned, it's one of 6 biodiversity hotspots. This ecosystem, which really depends on adequate freshwater flow directly down the river and then across into the floodplains and through the sloughs in the basin, that have an impact on, it's 144,000 acre floodplain. Fishing, Tupelo honey production, forestry, timbering, many of the industries and communities that live along this river, recreational activities, but it's really that fresh water flow from above that makes all of those things possible. These are some photos that I took on some of my trips. You can't see that big photo at the left very well, but these are fossil remains in Torreya State Park in Means Creek. Means Creek is named for Florida State University professor Bruce Means. They are over here. You can see 3 brown objects there. Those are dugong fossils. It's an animal related to the manatee that I think currently only exists in the Western Pacific, in I think Malaysia, maybe the only place that that animal exists today. But in ancient times, it existed here in Florida, and those fossil remains are in the bed of Means Creek. We have a salamander, the Apalachicola, I just forgot the name of it. This Bruce Means discovered this particular salamander. This is the only place this salamander exists. And then a variety of amphibian life also exists. So over 131 species of fresh and estuarine fish. 140 species of fish are found in the Bay Area. 50 different species of mammals. 40 species of amphibians, 80 species of reptiles, 282 species of migratory birds, or birds, as well as 181 or 64 different migratory bird species, more than 1,300 species of plants, including 103 that are threatened and endangered. So when we define this space as a biodiversity hotspot, I think I'm a non-scientist. These numbers kind of mean something to me, but the sort of, when you compare these numbers to other places in the United States and the world, the sheer magnitude of the diversity of plant and animal life in this corridor is mind-boggling. And what it is that we can study and learn from these species, and those particularly that are threatened or endangered, I think relates a lot to the decisions that can and maybe should be made about what happens in this corridor over time. Just a few more pictures. In Torreya State Park, off trail, there's a little river or a little cave that goes through a limestone deposit there. This is this year's river trek, a group of paddlers. I think that's Mary Slow off the edge of the river. Dan Tonsmeyer, the Riverkeeper, is explaining to us how that connects back into what is the top of, I think that's Lake Ammonia that goes back into. You can see, or it's a little bit dark, but the top left picture there, you're right, that's in a little slough that wound up and around. And I think one of the reasons I included that is you can see the root system of that tree and how totally out of the water, it's above our paddler's head, that system is. And that is directly affected by the level of flow from the river. When we were on the river this past year, or just a few weeks ago, initially the Army Corps of Engineers held back water. So we started paddling the river in drought stage. Last year, when I paddled the river, the Army Corps was holding water back, and it was a man-made drought the entire time we traveled the 5 days down the river. This year, they let some of the water flow, so about the third night, the river levels came up. And this, while there would have been always a natural ebb and flow of water throughout the system, the intensity of man-made controls on the river is having a decimating effect across the basin. The holding back of river based on commerce concerns in Georgia, particularly in Georgia, are altering life in the broader basin because these sloughs and tributaries, swamplands are not getting the fresh water flow that they need. One example of this, I think in the course of the last 10 years or so, millions, I think over 8 million Tupelo honey trees of both varieties have died, decimating the Tupelo honey industry, which may be an industry that seems like it only affects a small portion of people, but the availability of that honey, the possibility of generations of families continuing the work and lives that they have lived, as well as what that says about broader potentials or broader possibilities for us outside of the basin. That when, as some may know, where the bees die, we all die. And if there's no place, that's a problem. So beyond the environmental, I think, and impacts or the environmental uniqueness, I would also, I'm particularly interested in people, in the communities along the basin, in the histories of current and lost places, and the connection between the people and the environment. So when we look at the fact that the Apalachicola River and its basin is a biodiversity hotspot, this corridor being largely protected and undeveloped compared to many other river corridors in the United States. You don't paddle the river and see houses every few feet. Because of early paper and timber industry and the richness of the environment in the basin, there are many private protected lands, company lands that have been sold to the state. The Apalachicola National Forest also exists as a wide perimeter around the river itself. But there are also many small communities that aren't reachable easily. We stopped on River Track on the second night in a town called Estifanubla. Has anyone heard of Estifanubla? Elizabeth has, but that's because she's been on the trip. It's in Liberty County. I have never actually gotten there by land. I don't know how to get there by land. I've only gotten there by river. But it's one of many small communities. Weewahitchka, Bristol and Blountstown are a little bit bigger, that of people who exist along the river, who depend on the river not just for entertainment, but for life, and who are really struggling to figure out how to maintain their lives and the lives of their families in a river that even though it's only about an hour away, is largely forgotten by other areas in Florida. A few more pictures. That top left or top right is the house atop Torreya State Park. As you travel down the river, particularly the upper half of the river, you'll pass a lot of fish camps and houseboat communities. In the 4 years that I've traveled the river, based on flooding, tornadoes, probably some economic impact, I think there are fewer of those houses than there once were. You'll see big cypress stand tributaries. That top right picture is probably one of everyone's favorite spots on the river. That's a morning view or evening view from camp of Allen Bluff, which is one of the highest points in the state of Florida. This is another high point on the river. It's called Sand Mountain, and it is one of, I'll call it a terrible beauty. This mountain exists because of early 20th century dredging that the Army Corps of Engineers did to help make the river more navigable to commercial boats. That entire hill is dredged sand from the bottom of the river that they shot across the river onto the bank. The upper part of the river actually makes for really delightful camping, mostly because of core dredging in the early part of the 20th century. But the movement of the river and shifting of the sand in part make it what makes it a little bit fun today, but fundamentally also change the nature of the river over time. So there's a number of challenges facing the Apalachicola River that the Riverkeeper is engaged in working with. In 2016, the Apalachicola River was named America's most endangered river. This past spring, we partnered with faculty in the College of Communication, in environmental science, and in the English department to engage over 130 Florida State University students in an interdisciplinary effort to learn about the river. When asked what they thought the most pressing issue on the Apalachicola River was, they said pollution. That's actually not why the river was designated the most endangered river in 2016. It's actually because how it's positioned and the economic pressures that the communities along the river and the state face that suggest short-term development of the corridor, allowing, but just a few weeks ago in Calhoun County, they're going to allow some exploratory oil exploration and fracking exploration to see about the viability of fracking in the region. This is a first step towards permitting for other activities. They're changing county rules in order to help enable that process. The truth, I think, for many of the folks living along the river is that there's not a lot of opportunity. And how do you balance short-term financial opportunity with long-term viability and real true sustainability? That once you develop a space like this, you cannot go back. And I think what we just saw on the Amazon is a good point of that. I think the legal decisions, what happens with the Supreme Court this spring, will tell us a lot about how these issues are viewed on a national level. Regardless of the decision, it won't be the end of advocacy and other ways. I think perceptions are a huge challenge. Many of us who live quite close to this basin know nothing about it, and yet it's in our backyard. There's also a broad perception that the issues facing the river really only have an effect on the oysters in Apalachicola, and they do, and we love those oysters, but it's just a small part of the impact of changes up and down the river. And I'm running out of time, so I'm going to try to go through this fast. For that, I think that there are a large number of possibilities for the river and its basin. And the Riverkeeper, as an all-volunteer organization with a small staff, is really committed to helping educate, do outreach, to connect students and others to the people, environment, and the history of the basin, to working with groups, communities, government agencies for the restoration of the sloughs and the basin flows, to help reestablish the connection between the river and the broader expanse of the basin, to really think about and work with communities along the river, to think about long-term economic possibility as opposed to short-term economic payoff, and what that may really mean and how to balance that, and to think and advocate for the power of an undeveloped corridor. I think we exist in a time and in a culture that tells us development is the answer, that unused space is unimportant, is not, it's only valuable to a few. And we have real possibility here to protect this space and show the power and importance of undeveloped corridors in this. I think the Supreme Court decision in the spring, if they come to a decision, I think they will, also has the possibility of altering national water rights policies. This tri-state water issue, we are not unique in the United States. We all share waterways, and decisions that get made upstream and how they affect what's happening downstream. I think this decision will teach us a lot about directions that we may be able to go nationally. Those are just a few more pictures of the variant landscape on the river. I'll share these slides with Jesse. If you want more information, I've included a whole bunch of URLs. If you're interested in getting out on the river, the Riverkeeper does 4 Saturday paddles for the community for a small donation, $20, I think, $25. We provide kayak, and we take people to different areas along the river and across the basin. If you have students or projects and you'd like to get folks out on the river, the Riverkeeper office takes phone calls and is happy to figure out how to arrange that. The Apalachicola River project that I have here, the students who worked on this, particularly those in the College of Communications, worked on a series of really well done videos, all between 3 and 4 minutes. I really encourage you to go there and watch some of those videos. You get to hear, they interviewed not only Dan Tonsmeyer, our Riverkeeper, but also people who live along the river who are affected by the changes in the basin. And there's some really powerful footage in there, so I would encourage you to go there. And that's me on the river.
And we have about 8 minutes for questions.
I'd like to ask a question. I was in the very first, they used to call it the ACF course when it started around 2001, 2002, Steve Whiteman. And I was in the first run of it, and it very quickly began to grow, and there were about 40 people in it, including some law professors by the next run. And I was just wondering, is that course still running? Because if it is, and you guys haven't found out about it yet, it's a really very educational course to hear about, and also to be ready to speak up to the legislature or whoever, wherever, because a lot of people don't know about it, and it's fascinating, and it's really worth preserving. And if they want to do fracking anywhere in the state, they are absolutely crazy with what's happening in Oklahoma, and all we've got for our aquifer is cars.
Yeah.
I mean, it's frightening.
It is. In terms of the course, I'm actually not sure. I'll have to look that up to see if there's still doing that. Yeah,
Speed moved away.
Yeah. Yeah, the possibility of fracking in the corridor is absolutely terrifying. And I think that as we've seen in other places, given that, yeah, not just in this corridor, but in much of Florida, we're talking about a limestone karst underbelly with heavy reliance on some of the most unique spring environments in the world, that the idea that it's worth the risk is pretty phenomenal to me.
It's crazy because people are talking about being concerned about the chemicals. And heck with the chemicals, they're going to shatter the whole thing if they start that.
Mm-hmm.
It won't matter whether the water's clean or not anymore. We'll have many more sinkholes opening up than we now have.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't have the words for how scary and stupid that is.
I'm with you. Other questions?
I'm from DeKalb, like one of the major Atlanta counties, like with the 3 out of like the 25 statistic areas. And I've noticed in like the last few years, there's been an enormous, like just over the top, like development beyond what most people would consider reasonable. And with that comes like the draw on the infrastructure and like, we get all our water from the Chattahoochee. And I grew up like swimming on it, and there'll be like low times, but as you were talking about how there are like basically artificial drought, like symptoms down in the bay. I mean, how do you think, because obviously you can't like tell the developers or the people that are moving to, these new hubs, these developing centers like Atlanta. I mean, what would be a way to kind of like cope, or do you think there's any other than just like, building more and adapting? Because it seems like these water wars, I mean, it's arbitrary in the big picture. Like we shouldn't have to worry about it like that, especially not now. It's not even like peak population yet.
Yeah, I think, well, one, and it's an incredibly complicated issue. I do think, and I think the AFC coalition and the way that the Riverkeepers on the Flint River, the Apalachicola, and the Chattahoochee work together to advocate for the broader basin, that on the one hand, while you can't necessarily tell developers not to develop in some places, on the other hand, you kind of can. But then I think the other aspect of that is making, I think, sustainable development, not just a requirement, but an economic possibility and a choice that people want to make. So that one of the other fallacies in the water wars issue, I mean, Atlanta does pull a lot of water out of this basin. Lake Lanier as a recreational space holds a lot of water back. There's a lot of water issues in the Atlanta metro area because of that. It's not there's not enough water there to sustain the development that's happening. But it's also true, given the broad agricultural industry that extends through Georgia and Alabama, that through evaporation and agricultural practices, much more water is disappearing than should. So that even in DeKalb or in metropolitan areas, much less in agricultural spaces, having the possibility to make choices, not based on what, I want the greenest lawn that I can have. So I'm going to run my sprinkler all day long in 100-degree Atlanta day, and all that water is going to evaporate. That has direct impact on the flow of the river. So that this combination, I think, of government and legal action, of community responsibility, as well as sort of building individual awareness so that we don't make, that maybe people don't make choices to live in those spaces or to pre-buy homes and other things in these areas. Combined, I think that may help to have a positive effect.
We have time for one more question if anyone has it. I have a question actually about the fourth Saturday
Mhm.
Is there like a listserv or something that you can join and find out about that? Is that on the Riverkeeper website?
It's on the Riverkeeper website. Let me see if I can pull this up. You can sign up for the Riverkeeper Newsletter, and they'll announce the 4 Saturday paddles. They occur fairly regularly. They're volunteer-led, so occasionally they do get canceled. But they occur regularly from about February through.
You go to what we do, it's under events.
Oh, thanks.
There's one this Saturday.
There is one this Saturday. From about February or March through November, the winter months are a little less regular.
So we're going pleasurable.
Yes,
There's a picture of you on that too, if you scroll down.
that's right. I lead a lot of these.
Well, wonderful. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much.
All right, we're going to break for lunch now from 12 to 1, and then our keynote speaker is going to start at around 1 o'clock, and that'll go until 2. So feel free to help yourself and mingle and conversate, and we'll see you back here at 1 o'clock.
I know, I like it. I know, it's really.
Yeah.